Are you brave enough to face strange insectoid cultists? Ever wonder what a colony of sentient spores fears in the darkness? Find out in Bleak Sprout, a new 5e mini-module for the world's greatest RPG made by Deadbox Games. Bleak Sprout is cosmic horror meets peculiar whimsy in a satisfying adventure delivered in 3 succinct sessions. This adventure is ripe with pungent notes of H.P. Lovecraft served on a foundation of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids with an unexpected fungal finish. Bleak Sprout is live on Kickstarter right now. For only $9, your pledge earns you a beautiful digest-sized risograph print with 20 pages of clear text, an elegant layout, and hand-drawn maps and illustrations. Check out Bleak Sprout on Kickstarter now.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He used to work in the city that never sleeps, and his excuse for not sleeping was that he was working overnight. Stu Horvath.
It's true. I love working overnight. I was built for that.
Man, I would be like getting out of the bars when you were taking your lunch break.
Those were younger days. My constitution certainly can't handle that now.
Oh, God, mine either. Yeah, at that hour of the morning, technically, I am well asleep.
Yeah.
So how you doing today, Stu?
Pretty good. How are you?
You know, I can't complain. What are we actually talking about today?
We are talking about cities.
Wow, my joke was really on the nose. What is Cities?
So Cities is a product from Midkemia Press. You can tell how old it is because they just named it what it is. And that name was still available. You know, it was early enough that nobody had published something called Cities yet. Comes out in 1979. And they kind of make a career during the early days of role-playing out of making city supplements. Systems for like simulating city existence. So they put out Cities in 79 and they kind of keep putting it out for the next several years. And after the company goes bankrupt or just sort of goes fallow, really, Chaosium picks it up and reprints them and revises them a couple times. So it's sort of multiple versions of this same book and approach to RPG cities just repeatedly coming out through the mid 80s. Most people are going to know the name Midkemia through the Raymond Feist novels. He did a massive series of novels called, I believe it's called the Rift War Cycle, set in one of 2 worlds, which is Midkemia, which is based on this world that was the campaign setting of this 1970s game group that was out of the UC San Diego. Sort of an old school early adapter D&D club on campus. And he was part of that. And he sort of spun out the stories into novels and had a successful career out of it. So in the late 90s, the Betrayal at Krondor video game is based on the Raymond Feist novels. That is my closest brush with those books. I've never read them, but Betrayal at Krondor, really good video game. So in the 70s, 79, these guys publish out their campaign setting and it never really happens. But what they do is they put out Cities, which is sort of a generic kind of approach to simulating a city experience. So the idea is that you're simulating the experience of walking from one point in the city to another. You're not really worried too much about the buildings or the character of the city as place. You're worrying about the city as experience, right? Because your city is going to be different from my city, is going to be different from, you know, Tim's city down the block. The supplement has to kind of work around the features of the architecture of the city. So like, it doesn't matter what the buildings are like or what the culture there is like. We're just talking about the bustle on the street and sort of conveying the sense of metropolitan livelihoods, you know, hundreds of thousands of people kind of going about their business, each with their own personal agenda, right?
Right.
Which is exactly, you know, you go to New York City and you walk around and everybody has a purpose and it's not yours. They're walking in front of you. And it gets really annoying. Or they're not walking in front of you and it gets really, really annoying. This is the idea, and they accomplish this through random tables. It's so good. I love this. Hambo, if you came to my house and you said, Stu, I have a gun and we're going to get rid of some of these role-playing games. You just have too many. You've gone too far and I have to put a stop to this. But I'll let you keep some stuff. I would probably keep all of the city books. I find the subject of cities super fascinating. And Midkemia's city books are basically the first crack at creating role-playing cities. And basically at this point, they are for Dungeons and Dragons. No one was doing this. No one had a clue how to do this. And the way they did it is so specific and so brilliant. So your party leaves and you're going somewhere. Doesn't matter why, but you're on the street. You roll like every 3 minutes on the charts. And what happens is sometimes nothing happens, and that's cool too. But sometimes you get those moments, and I'm sure you've had these, we've had a lot of adventures in New York City and other cities where like one thing after another happens, right? And it just becomes one of those stories where like if you didn't just give up at one point and like got into the cab or the subway or wherever and decided I'm out, like I'm done, I'm going home, something crazy, like movie level crazy would have happened, right?
Oh yeah.
You roll the chart and boom, there's going to be a roadblock and there's going to be guards, and it's not even like, it's just a checkpoint. So now you immediately have congestion and your players have to deal with that, right? And for every couple minutes that they're on the street, you roll another encounter roll. There's some lady who wants to hire your fighter, and she just comes up to the fighter and she's like, dude, I need help. You need to help me like get this guy off of my porch. He's just like hanging out there. So like that's another inconvenience that's going on. Meanwhile, somebody else tries to like murder somebody else in the street. And like all of these things are like compounding on what your players are trying to do. Like they have a mission, but you're throwing all of these things, these inconveniences at them. Potentially they're stories, but maybe they're just like gnats and it's just an aggravation. But all of it makes the city feel alive, right?
Oh yeah.
Because like you have panhandlers running into you. There's a guy selling books from a cart and like surly drunks and all sorts of stuff just happening around the players, and you describe it and they can interact with it or choose not to. And just having characters jostled by other people on the street, it's little details like that that really make a game come alive. Now, rolling that amount of random encounters and tables is intense. It comes from a very different type of game. People don't necessarily play like that anymore. So this is a very old school kind of approach, but I think it's a really cool one and a very formative one. And this is sort of blew my mind when I was really digging into this for the book. Thieves World, the Chaosium box set that was like the all-star, We Are the World role-playing game supplement that came out in like 81. Chaosium didn't build the city. They farmed it out to Midkemia Press, who basically came up with a series of charts that simulated the sanctuary's specific kind of vibe. And then they built the encounter tables for that box set, which is the thing that makes that box set so good, because it's not generic. The details are specific to the Thieves World anthology stories. So like it really does a good job of making the city feel alive. And so much of the why you're in Thieves World is because you want to traverse the city. You don't want to hang out in the house, or maybe you do want to hang out at the Vulgar Unicorn, but like mostly like you're on the rooftops, you're looking for something to happen. Where the action is on the street or under the street. And all of these charts make those spaces vibrant and exciting and chaotic and where the unexpected can happen. It's a lot of work and can become tedious, but when it comes together, you can see just in the charts how much awesome emergent storytelling material is just there waiting for like the right combination of like events and feisty players willing to kind of diverge from their goals to sort of explore the city in the way that like a city should kind of beckon to players and characters alike.
Well, it's interesting the way you describe it and the way it's laid out, because granted, I know it seems like a broad generalization. However, most people have been to a major city.
Yeah.
If you don't live in one, you've been to one. Maybe even on a field trip when you were a kid in school, you went to like the National History Museum or something.
Yeah.
Every major city has that vibe. They have that spirit where there's always a lot going on and always like things that you're going to encounter. None more so than I would say New York City. And I'm not saying it because I live in New Jersey and I'm partial to it because it's right next door. I've been all around this great country and abroad. Dear listener, there is no city like New York City. And I'm not trying to romanticize it because I don't even like going to New York City, but there really is no city like New York City, because what happens between one corner and the next is something that will never happen again, because it's just the right mixture of person, place, and time and thing in a lot of instances kind of coming together. In a lot of ways, to me, it feels like the universe doing improv. And that is what this game sounds like to me, where you're rolling every 3 minutes and you're adding a new thing on. It's a lot of yes and, because it's like, yeah, I'm trying to get into the vulgar unicorn, and now this bouncer's giving me guff, but this panhandler's coming up trying to pick my pocket. This lady across the street wants to hire me for my fighting skills, and then whatever's going to happen next. I mean, most people who play RPGs, they're going from A to B.
Yeah.
But now it's you're going from A to B, but C, D, E, F, G, and H maybe are also kind of crossing paths with you while you do. And I think that's actually pretty fun, man. I think that's a really kind of exciting way to approach role playing. And it's something that happened so long ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is born out of the idea of simulating all of the little bits and bobs of traversal. This is the stuff that, as games have developed, that's most easily hand waved. I don't care about walking through the city. Let's just fast forward. We're fast traveling to the police station because nothing really interesting is going to happen there. But Cities really points out the lie of that, where yes, you have your agenda that's dictated by your character's goals and the story at large, but there's stories everywhere, and unusual things can happen when you're going from point A to point B, but you have to be willing to simulate the trip from point A to point B. And to really, really make it work, that trip from point A to point B, most of the time needs to be boring and nothing happens, so that when something does happen, it becomes really, really special. And that is sort of the test of this kind of system, and the patience of your players and the tone of your game. I think this is a very different old school style of play. This is very different, I think, even from old school revival style of play. I just don't think that in the modern age, people have the time or the willingness to kind of get into these particular sorts of traversal systems the way that people were in the late 70s, because it was also new and interesting. And I think that these are sort of just naturally the things that go to the wayside because they just ask too much of players over time.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this isn't a knock, it's more of a statement of fact, but I don't know many people these days who have the time to really commit to games where there is no hand waving of trying to get from A to B, because, you know, a lot of us are playing over Discord or playing over Roll20, playing over Zoom, and playing from our homes. And also, as I've gotten older, I realize, man, it's been a minute since I've had a really long D&D session. I mean, I would dare say your bachelor party and some of the Cthulhu sessions that we did were like the last times. And at this point, it's been years where there was like a really long session going on. So, I mean, I think if you have the time and the patience and the ability, something like this sounds cool, because you're not always going to get into a fist fight with the constable. And you know what? You're right. It won't always be Pizza Rat playing chicken with the third rail.
Yeah, exactly. By definition, you can't have Pizza Rat every time you go out into the city, because then it becomes old and weird and silly, and you'll exhaust your charts, right? That's one of the things, that there's a finite number of things that you could hit with these random charts. You could always make new charts, but that's a lot of work. All I'm saying is that, like, all of this is, I think, very cool. It's a demanding sort of game that requires a level of commitment that is serious from everybody involved. And for it to work the best, I think that you have to like assert that commitment all the time. Like, you can't really skimp on it. Like, it's just not something that I'm interested in running, but I think that that's super interesting. I find it fascinating because I always hear stories about things going off the rails and it being like so unpredictable in a way that's like different than the unpredictability in games that I've played and ran. Because when we play it, it is very much like, this is the shoot. Like, we've got 2 hours, and if we digress too far, I'm going to put a stop to it, like get you back into like the hotness, because like we only have 2 hours, so it's got to be all killer, no filler, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of this. I love everything that you've told me so far, and I think that if people have the opportunity and the time, this would be something really cool to experiment with, seemingly in any system, which leads me to my question, Stu. Do you think that this is something that if they updated it and they did like a modern scenario, like say if they were doing this for like modern Cthulhu taking place in like 2021 New York City or Delta Green, or even like any other scenario where you're in modern time, do you think it could really simulate the city?
I do. This sort of quickly went out of fashion. By 83, I think that city design had changed and it became much more interested in detailing individual buildings. And already that idea of the bustle was uninteresting. You don't have it in Pavis, which is a RuneQuest supplement. You don't have it in Lankmar, City of Adventure. The city design just changes and it becomes much more hand wavy. Or I guess the focus switches from randomness to bespoke encounters. Like, the idea is to like you to use something and sort of think it out a little bit, make it more meaningful, which is just a different style and different philosophy. I think that there's a beauty in randomness. And I think that the OSR generally embraces that beauty. And I think that charts just are becoming more in fashion again. I think that they're fun. I love charts. I love random tables. Like, give me all the random tables. Like, the Mothership random tables are so good. And the ones that I'm speaking about are ones that there's 2 in the main book. One is for like patches on your uniform, and one is for just general trinkets, I think. And they're 2 of my favoriteest random charts because like you get like 1 roll on each, and so much of your character comes out of that. They just spark like a level of creativity and detail and flavor that you wouldn't be able to kind of do on your own spontaneously, because the randomness is what fires it, right? And that's what all of these Midkemia city systems do on the level of a city. It's just like you never know what's going to happen. I'm not a huge fan of the movies, but it's sort of like The Hangover, where it's just one crazy thing after another. When it comes together, it's about simulating that kind of city experience, that kind of like crazy adventure where you never really see what's coming down the pipe at you next.
That's awesome, man. So, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Cities?
Cities is super cool. There was one in 79. They reprinted it in 81. There's a couple other Midkemia books called The City of Kars and Toulon of the Isles, which came out in 80 and 81. Those detailed specific cities in their world using these sort of table systems. And they work a lot like Thieves World, where you get a lot of specific details, which you might not want to play in Toulon of the Isles, but like you could use that. You could look at that and kind of really distill how to make charts on your own. All of these were republished by Chaosium later. They were modernized a little bit. And there was a RuneQuest 3 version by Avalon Hill. There's a whole bunch of versions of these out there. They range in price because they're old and because they sort of have like a famous name attached to them. They kind of seem to want to be expensive, but I also got mine for dirt cheap. All of which is to say, try and find them, try and track them down. I think that there's a lot here that will be surprising and interesting for your game personally. And if you're a designer, I think that there's a lot here to kind of explore with new, fresh OSR indie game sensibility eyes. It's not something that seems tapped to me yet in this modern era.
Well, that sounds very exciting. And this is another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, of course.
Huzzah. You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I will be promoting my games more, so I'll be posting more. You could also hit me up anytime on the Vintage RPG Discord. We've got a killer Discord community over there, and we've got an even better one over on our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. Besides the Patreon-only Discord community, we've also got early release episodes. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at my RPG 321 action. We've got a behind-the-scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points, as well as early release episodes, some cool videos that we put up there from time to time. We got some cool stuff in the works as well. We can't really talk about it yet, but we're getting there. So patreon.com/vintagerpg. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.